The camera was invented in the early 1800s. One of the earliest surviving images, the view from the window at Le Gras, is from 1826 or 1827. While very primitive, it unlocked a new way to document history. The history books can lie, but a photograph doesn't. Photographers from this era showed an incredible side to the Wild West that we don't see in the history books. But while the camera doesn't lie, people do, and all it takes is for photos to be ignored in the history books for another side of history to remain silenced. One reason the Wild West is so romanticized is that gritty photography in this era is hard to come by. That's why we wanted to look at several photos that you may not have seen in the history books. Sometimes it's because the history books wanted these photos to be left out. Other times, it's because these photos have only recently been discovered. These photos are a combination of shocking, from showing how a slave was treated, wholesome, like a group of cowboys bathing together, and outright creepy. For example, did you know the apparent ghost of Abe Lincoln was photographed? With that said, kindly like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications to see the latest obscure frontier history. Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid is perhaps the most famous outlaw in the West. Born Henry McCarty and under the alias William H. Bonney, he had a short life, dying at only 21 after being shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett. During such a short period of time, however, he got into a lot of trouble, including being connected to 9 murders, 4 of which he was responsible for. He also stole food and also stole money from a Chinese laundry before fleeing state lines where he became a fugitive. But his legacy still lives on, being romanticized in over 50 movies, TV shows, and books. And even as recent as 2010, we're learning new things about Billy, including this photograph. This photograph was found at a memorabilia shop in Fresno in 2010 and was authenticated in 2015. In it, you see Billy, on the left, playing croquet with a member of the Regulators, a posse who fought in the Lincoln County War. The photograph is fascinating, as when we think of outlaws, we always imagine them on the run, plotting their next robbery, or getting into something illegal. However, we sometimes forget that these were people too, and they had plenty of hobbies. In Billy's case, he was a fan of croquet, a sport that involves hitting a ball with a mallet through hoops. By the way, this photo was bought for $2 and is now worth $5 million. So the next time you are thrift shopping, you may leave this store a millionaire and not even know it. Pearl Hart. Have you ever followed a celebrity's news closely, even paying attention to their prison escapades when they get arrested? The next photo shows that history isn't too much different than modern times. Pearl Hart was born in 1871 under the name Pearl Taylor and lived a pretty conventional life at first. Since they were affluent, Pearl enjoyed many such luxuries, including boarding school education. During her time at boarding school, she met a guy she became enamored. Shortly after meeting, she would get married at a young age to a man who was a drunkard, a gambler, and a rake. Many women at this time would have stuck to this toxic marriage, but not Hart. Though they did reconcile and had 2 children, Pearl wanted something different, and during the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, she would get this. During her time there, she started to develop a fascination for the cowboy lifestyle. She left him for good after becoming fascinated with being a cowboy after watching a Buffalo Bill show, taking a train to Trinidad, Colorado with a piano player named Dan Bandman. Hart lived an unconventional lifestyle, smoking cigars, drinking liquor, and even taking morphine. She worked as a cook and singer at many of the local bars, and she may have made her income from prostitution. But soon, she discovered a better way to make money as a woman in these times: a life of crime. She teamed up with an acquaintance who went by Joe Boot and robbed a stagecoach that had let its guard down. Since this coach hadn't been robbed in years, there was no shotgun messenger. And Hart and her companion robbed the coach of $431.20, or over $16,000 today. This robbery would later be known as one of the last recorded robberies in the Old West, with it being infamous because of her gender. But the law soon caught up to her, and she was soon imprisoned. However, a female prisoner, let alone a robber, was a big deal in these times. One might think it was the end of Hart's exploits, right? Far from it. When she got out, the media was all over her, including one notable one still around today. Here is a photograph from Cosmopolitan. Despite being a hardened criminal, the photo showed her feminine side, and her beauty won her many fans. Cosmopolitan even mentioned how different Hart was from what's expected, saying she was just the opposite of what would be expected of a stagecoach robber. Though, when angry or determined, hard lines show around her eyes and mouth. The locals became enamored with her too after a life of crime. It was even said that one fan gave her a bobcat cub as a pet. And you thought celebrity culture nowadays is strange. Imagine handing a bobcat over to your favorite artist. Hart's womanly charms, and the fact that female prisons didn't exist in those times, made it simple for her to win over the guards. There was even a rumor that she and the warden were lovers. She was given a large cell with a yard. It was her prison, but also her photo studio, and way to connect with the media and her fans. Hart did escape prison with the help of an assistant on October 12, 1899, leaving behind an 18-inch hole in the wall. After escaping, she did end up going to trial for robbing the stagecoach. During such, Hart made a plea, claiming she needed the money to go to her mother. The judge was angry that she was found not guilty, scolding the jurors for not following their duties. Shortly after the acquittal, she was then rearrested for tampering with the mail. Take a look at this photo. It almost looks like a promo shot from a prison drama. But no, it was a real photo. Even after leaving prison, Hart became a celebrity and even had a show where she reenacted her crime in front of a live audience. Eventually, she tried to play it straight and run a cigar store, but she was arrested there after she received stolen property. Old habits do die hard. This story isn't talked about much in the male-dominated history books, but it reveals a lot about history. Pearl is considered a feminist folk hero by many, and we can see that. Her craftiness and her taking advantage of a society run by men at this time can be inspiring, even if her crimes are not endorsable. Not just that, but her being famous shows that America has always had a fascination with criminals, even before true crime podcasts. Annie Oakley. Annie Oakley has received more recognition in recent years, but her story is still rarely told in the history books. Born Phoebe Ann Mosey, Oakley would hunt for food as a child to feed her family in western Ohio. Her first shot was when she was 8 years old, according to biographers. She grabbed a rifle and shot the squirrel trying to grab a hickory nut. A bit excessive for a squirrel stealing something. But when you have mouths to feed, sometimes it's best to take matters into your own hands. When she was 15, she would win a shooting contest, and shortly after she joined Buffalo Bill's troop with her husband, Frank E. Butler. Annie became a legend in sharpshooting and showmanship. She would shoot a cigar right from her husband's hand, for example. Would you trust your spouse to do that? Probably not. But Annie did. There were plenty of photos and even videos of Annie. Yes, I said videos. Here's an 1894 video of her by Thomas Edison. With that said, here's a photo that you may not have seen. This photo shows her shooting from behind using a hand mirror. Again, would you trust yourself not only with a gun, but also to shoot it behind you with only a hand mirror to guide you? If I were this photographer, I'd be fascinated but scared. However, she did it, and that feat is still captured in history books. Like Pearl, this shows that the Old West had women who could keep up with the men. But it also shows the blending between fact and reality as the world transitioned to a more industrialized society. Annie Oakley's showmanship took Old West tropes and romanticized them, with many of us nowadays believing that every cowboy was a sharpshooter just like Annie. Annie didn't do it alone. A history of folklore and movies also helped. But she is a fascinating piece of the puzzle. Quana Parker. Next, we have Quana Parker, who has a fascinating history. He was the son of Cynthia Ann Parker, who was born into a frontier family. In 1836, Cynthia was captured by the Comanche at the young age of 8. There, she assimilated into the tribe and even married Peta Nocona, or lone wanderer. So already Quana was the son of two worlds, the so-called civilized settlers and the so-called savage Native Americans. In a way, his assimilation into both worlds helped bring new perspectives, including when dealing with indigenous and governmental politics. Quana grew up to have incredible sway over not just his tribe, but also the federal government. He was never a chief but was appointed federally as the Comanche Nation's federal chief, elected deputy sheriff of Lawton, Oklahoma, and even became wealthy as a rancher. He also became a known emissary of Indigenous Americans to the United States legislature, meaning that if there were problems, he helped take care of them. To this day, he is still known as the last chief of the Comanche, applied as well to horseback. His life in photos shows a blending of two cultures. The Comanche believed that his tribe should adopt Christian values, but instead of believing exactly how the settlers believed, he advocated for the Native American Church, which adopted Native American and Christian beliefs. Though it took a little bit of time for this to gain traction, some of the natives did open up to the idea. Perhaps the most fascinating photo you probably didn't see in the history books is this one of him wearing European American business attire, taken in 1889. When you look at this, would you even think that he was part of an indigenous tribe? Quana looks natural in a suit, and anyone who passes him by knows this. This was a man who went hunting with Teddy Roosevelt and, as mentioned, was a wealthy rancher. However, he did not sell out his native roots. His long braided hair is very prominent in this photo, showing that even though he planned to adapt to a society quickly approaching the 20th century, he would never abandon his heritage. Quana was a focal part of relations between indigenous people and the government, and in turn, because of this, helped ensure that fairness was adopted to the tribes and made relations friendlier between these two worlds. Mary Fields. The next photo we're going to talk about is Stagecoach Mary Fields. We've discussed her before in a video about women in the frontier, so we'll briefly touch upon her again. Mary was the first black woman to work as a star route postwoman in the US, and she was tough as nails. She was known to drink, use foul language, and once fought off a pack of wolves all night using her shotgun after her stagecoach fell. Her contributions to the US Postal Service are to be remembered and have been immortalized in photography. This photo of her, like pearls, looks like a promo shot from a TV show. The way she holds the gun with confidence but isn't looking straight at the camera just exudes strength. Also, the dog is cute too. Though some history books show this, many shy away, as the concept behind the Old West is that it was mostly all white and indigenous people. But from our previous videos and these photographs, it was far from the case, showcasing that this time incorporated a melting pot of people. Indigenous Suffering. Now, let's touch upon a photo that shows the hardships that indigenous tribes went through. These hardships are often discussed in the history books, but they are often whitewashed, and rarely do we see photos. The plight of indigenous people is often shied away from in history books, or watered down because it is far from pleasant. So, let's look at some. In 1886, 400 Apaches were exiled and sent to Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida. As if this wasn't horrific enough, citizens of Pensacola petitioned the government to send Jeromino, a feared warrior, and 15 men to Fort Pickens. This separated them from their families. Geronimo never saw his homeland again. While Geronimo was a controversial figure in history, this photograph makes us root for him. The men sitting down look proud, but they seem melancholy. Meanwhile, their captors, sitting on the train, look at them with an almost comic book villain grin. Photography also helped to humanize the indigenous tribes during these times, painting light on just who these people were. This photo of a Navajo family shows a group of people trying to live life in nature. And this photo of Oglala Sioux member Broken Arm shows how beautiful the headdresses were. The pose evokes a feeling of pride that makes the viewer sympathize with the tribe and see them as more than savages. Here's a photo that shows a tribe performing what is known as a ghost dance. This 1890 dance is based on the millenarian teachings of Wovoka, a spiritual leader of the Northern Paiute tribe. These beliefs taught that a significant change was coming that would transform society. If the tribe danced properly, they could reunite with the dead and even use them in a great upcoming battle. As you can see in the photo, many are dancing. This shows that the tribe's people, even when faced with hardship, could seek comfort in the idea that one day, a transformation would bring peace and prosperity to their tribes. While many history books are painting Indigenous people in a better light and acknowledging the horrors of past treatment, there is still a ways to go. Hopefully, as more light is shown on what happened with these people, that they will be able to, through all of this, capture the essence of what really happened with these tribes and the pain they suffered. Peter the Slave. One way that people fight for racial rights is to show the horrors of racism, and Peter the Slave's photo is one perfect example. While many of us were taught slavery in school and even knew slaves got whipped, the damage they took was still whitewashed in the history books. This photo demonstrates the horrors of the scarring, known as colloiding. This form of scarring comes as a result of overgrowths of the collagen tissue at the site. For many slaves that suffered whippings, they sported these scars. Here is an example. This was a photograph of an escaped slave that shows just how much damage one's back could take as a slave. The colloided scars on his back almost look like a kaleidoscope image, and the caption of the photo is saddening. Overseer Artayu Carrier whipped me. I was 2 months in bed sore from the whipping. My master came after I was whipped. He discharged the overseer. The very words of poor Peter, taken as he sat for his picture. Through photography, the story that the slaves had been trying to tell for decades was finally told. They could show the oppression they faced and, more importantly, use photography to empower themselves. Though it might be painful to look at, acknowledging these scars and the horrors that happened allow us to move forward and paint a more realistic picture of time past. Cowboys Bathing. Now, let's talk about the cowboy. We've had plenty of talks in these videos about how cowboys weren't like they were in the movies. One example of that is that even though our cowboy heroes are rugged, they are well-groomed and look clean. You can practically smell the cologne off them. But in real life, running water was rare, especially if you had to transport cattle across the old dusty trail. So you'd go for days and days without taking a bath. I don't know about you, but I feel filthy if I don't take a bath at least once a day. But for these cowboys, it was normal. You got used to the smell and the dirt caked on your face. And when you did bathe, it was typically at a pond. This photo shows a group of cowboys taking a bath inside a pond near Seward, Kansas. As if a pond can already be filthy, imagine all the dirt and grime mixing in with it. And imagine having to take a bath with someone else, is filthy. While it's gross, it does show the camaraderie that cowboys went through. For these cowboys, their co-workers were like their brothers, and they were even comfortable sharing a bath with them. While it's a little gross in hindsight, perhaps we could learn something from them, and maybe history is not something you should clean up. Capturing a wolf. Here's yet another photo of cowboys working together to overcome a threat. Wolves were one of the biggest threats to cowboys and their livestock. And when a wolf is coming after you, you're likely to shoot and kill it. But when a group of cowboys work together, they can catch the wolf alive and make some money from it. Several clever cowboys roped this gray wolf, and it probably learned a lesson not to mess with these cowboys, or any cowboy for that matter. Prostitutes working together. The gold rush wasn't just the western mainland USA. The Klondike gold rush of the late 1800s had travelers going all the way up to Canada and Alaska. People would do anything for a little bit of gold, huh? Perhaps that's the origins of what would you do for a Klondike bar? All jokes aside, many women joined the gold rush, and a majority were prostitutes. Since chasing gold and gambling all for the chance to find it is a vice itself, the people who participated in the gold rush were indulging in other vices as well. Some women who went there were consenting adults who wanted to make some extra money. However, some were trafficked, or were forced to get into prostitution after their husbands died during the gold rush. This photo shows that there was plenty of camaraderie with them, however. In modern times, we tend to imagine a prostitute as scantily dressed or at least showing ample cleavage. But these women were modestly dressed. Judging by how that woman is riding that log, they had a sense of humor despite the depressing life they went through. They were people who should not be demonized but respected as a part of history's sometimes seedy past. Creepy photos. Now, let's end things off by looking at some photos that look outright creepy. It's not Halloween yet, but a good scare can be year-round. Here is a photo of a woman wearing a mask. While the exact date is unknown, it's agreed that the reason for her wearing this mask is due to it protects her skin from sun damage. Rare diseases also existed in the Old West, and we empathize with this woman's condition. But this doesn't mean that the mask doesn't look like something from a horror movie. Here's a photo of the outlaw Brazen Bill Brazelton. Like most robbers, he wore a mask to conceal his identity during his robberies. A 5-man posse hunted him down and killed him, and a post-mortem photograph was taken, one with the mask and the other without. While many nowadays find post-mortem photography creepy, it was common. The mask over his face adds to the creep factor. It almost looks like an execution video in modern times. Here is a photo from the days when bison were on the brink of extinction. The photo originates from Michigan Carbon Works, located in Rougeville, Michigan, and was taken in 1892. For reference, there were up to 60 million bison in North America, and when this photograph was taken, there were over 456. It's a miracle that we didn't hunt them to extinction. While we're not against people hunting for food or even for sport, how a person could see this giant pile of skulls and ask themselves that maybe they're going a little too far is a mystery to us. Finally, let's look at William Mumler's photography. He's often referred to as a spirit photography medium, as his photos show people from beyond the grave with their loved ones. Here is a photo of him with the ghost of a cousin who died 12 years prior. Here's yet another person with a ghost embracing them. Most famously, here's a photo of Abraham Lincoln's widow, Mary Todd Lincoln, with Lincoln's ghost watching over her from beyond the spirit realm. If you see these photos, you may be in awe. This is far away from the era of Photoshop or AI, so how can this be? Did Lincoln truly come back from beyond the grave? However, if you know anything about old photos, you may know that long exposure times were common. Mueller took a double exposure of a previous client, did not clean off the plate, and then took another photo. In other words, the Lincoln was some man with a beard who, when washed out, could be interpreted as Lincoln. Mumler was charged with this, and the court even received evidence that one of the ghosts was alive. Despite this, he got away. His tale shows that fraudsters taking advantage of people's grief was still as prevalent back then as it is now. Not only that, but sometimes the people who defraud others get away with it. These photos give us a glimpse into the Old West that is often overlooked, showing that it's a more nuanced time than what the history books depict. It was messy, sometimes funny, and despite us saying that photos can't lie, fraudsters could even manipulate pictures. The images show that even though society was a lot different back then, some aspects have stayed the same. It also depicted some of the horrors that people hope to bury away. We can only hope that future history books not only acknowledge these pictures, but also bring to light what the implications of these photos have not just on society in the past, but also today. We'd love to make a follow-up video, so let's ask you guys. What are your favorite photos, preferably obscure, that truly tell 1,000 words? Let us know in the comments.